We'll see whether it impacts earnings or earnings forecasts, but actually, I think it's more about the embedded valuations in these companies. There's this sense of American exceptionalism, the US exceptionalism that's embedded into pricing. And that you're seeing this morning is being challenged.
Yeah.
That's a good way of explaining, isn't it? And to the point around the US in one lane, Europeans and other countries in another, can I just get to that? Because at the end of last week, I sat down with the Productivity Commissioner for Europe, the Industry Commissioner, and he's telling me, look, there is a response coming to the Draghi and letter reports. There is a response, and by the end of February, we'll have even more detail. Should we hold out any hope that Europe is actually going to change some of its regulation? And what was told to me was like, look at climate change, for instance. We keep net zero, but in fact, we don't tell companies how to do it anymore. We get less prescriptive. So do you think we should be confident that some of that regulation is going to get better for Europe soon?
Well, step one, let's find out what the issues are. Let's address the issues. Step two, let's create sensible policy to then direct companies towards the issue. That's where we are today. The good news is that there's not a lot embedded in terms of what people expect. I don't think if you look at the valuations of the various bourses, yes, you've had reasonable price action, but they're still embedding a lot of skepticism about corporate profitability improvement, about Europe's ability to actually generate growth. And so the hurdle's pretty low over there. Can you get consolidation in the banking sector? Can you get consolidation in some of these other sectors that probably need it? We shall see.
Yeah. OK, let's move on to Federal Reserve and the ECB. One is expected to hold, the other is expected to cut. Yes. Bank of England could, in the next week or so, cut as well. How much are the interest rate differentials affecting your world?
Well, I think meaningfully so. I think what we've seen is that sort of you've moved from this world where rising interest rate differentials of the US versus sort of the ex-US complex have supported a lot of the story in and around. The dollar has been very strong on the back of that. But that story has now moved over into, well, actually, the sustained growth means that even as interest rate differentials come down, the dollars remain strong. So that's a vulnerable trade, I think. And then meanwhile, people are talking about we might be at the end of the hiking cycle or the cutting cycle. Yes. I think that story is sort of preemptive. You could be in a world where we're revisiting sort of the stories of the end of last year where we say cuts more.
Can I ask you about tariffs? Because before this DeepSeek story hit, it was also one of the big stories that, look, we're now working towards some sort of regime where tariffs are used up front to try and get a reaction rather than as just a negotiating tool without ever seeing the light of day. And of course, the next stop could be Mexico, watching Canada closely. I know you've been looking at the implications for Mexico. And there is a view, and we heard this in Davos last week, that instead of the supply chain being routed towards North America, it's just going to be inside the United States.
Absolutely.
What ramifications does it have for emerging markets like Mexico?
It does. I mean, a lot of Mexico's trade happens with the US, as you can imagine. But increasingly, there is this sense of, well, what is his key priority? You've seen what's happened with Colombia this morning. It's very hard to actually separate the tactics from the actual implication of tariffs. And pricing has gotten to a point where actually, the peso is quite cheap. It's got a very high carry. Mexican assets in general have sold off in anticipation of some hefty tariffs. So you could have that play out. More likely, it's a negotiating tool, and those assets might turn out to be cheap regardless.